All right, well, we're going to roll with the slides anyway. Hopefully they work. Welcome to Vendor Hacking, how to get your tools to suck less. I'm Andy Piazza.
This is James Nixon. Nice to meet you guys.
We're going to talk a little bit about who we are and why we are here in the first place. So I'm the Chief Evangelist for FIA LLC. I'm also, yes, one of the organizers here for BSidesNoVA. I'm a former combat MP. I got into threat intelligence a few years ago. I am the first employee with my company, which is really exciting because James is the first employee of his company. My wife, Meredith, as you saw earlier on the keynote, is also an employee of our company. So she likes to remind me just because I'm the first employee doesn't make me the number one employee. So James and I talked about this a couple of years ago, or last year at BSidesNoVA, the idea of, making our tools work better. I am on the user side. I usually get very angry when I start talking to developers and they're like, oh, do you want it to do this kind of a join or this kind of a join? And I'm like, I want a big, stupid green button that says go, right? Where's the easy button for a user? And James is that guy. So James, go ahead and give your background.
Yeah, so where I'm at today is the first time I've taken on the responsibility of leading customer success. Previously, I spent a lot of time being one of those software developers that would ask those, well, how do you want the join to work behind the big, stupid button? And transitioned into doing a lot of data science, enterprise architecture. So first to join the co-founders over here, and it's now my job to make sure that when people like Andy say, I need this, this is awesome, this sucks, how are we going to get it into our roadmap, or how to train them to use the product the way it was designed to solve the problem, meet their needs.
Yeah, so this is not a vendor pitch. You see my corporate logo at the bottom. I am representing the greatest company in Northern Virginia called FIA. If you're looking for a job, and we do a lot of government contracting, usually U.S. security clearances are required. Do hit us up. We're more than happy to talk about career opportunities. James is representing Analyst One. BSidesNoVA is a no vendor pitch thing. So I will say, if you're looking in the threat intelligence platform, go check out their platform. It's one of the best. He can't say that here, but I can. It is one of my favorites, but yeah, it's a really cool opportunity, right? To talk about, I think, really something important in anywhere in InfoSec, but really here in Northern Virginia too, because we've got our own problems with acquisition, being government or government contractors. We really want to talk about, vendors are always like, you should check out our solution. I'm like, your solution's more problems than my problem was, man. So let's figure out how to tear down some of those walls. So we know we as users, we suck, right? We're going to say suck a lot. We're trying to be fun. And if you are offended, you're probably in the wrong talk. We're really good as users, we're really good at naming problems. If you come and say, hey, what are your requirements to fix this thing? I'm going to tell you everything that sucks about my current job, right? Go get a cup of coffee or a glass of whiskey and be like, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks. What we're really, really bad at is reminding or telling in the requirements what we really like too. So we go buy a new solution, they buy the things that fix all the things that suck, and they forget or don't know to keep all the things that we do like. And so we want to talk about that. That's my role here from a user perspective, is how can we be better users and get better feedback to the acquisition teams if we have those, or to the vendor directly, right? How to kind of be a better steward of our money and our technology so we can actually get tools that work for us. We also have this problem too, where we buy a tool, right? And like you go out and you buy a Prius and then you want to put a lift kit on it. Like that doesn't help with the Prius, right? We want to break the tools that we just bought. One of the reasons I actually really respect Analyst One, when I first met them, didn't know anything about them. They came and pitched to an agency that I was working at. While they were pitching, we were asking if they could do something. And Scott, I see you in the chat. Scott, one of the founders of Analyst One, was like, no, we can't do that. And they're like, well, what if we, pay you more money? And he's like, no, that would break our tool. And I just really appreciated that from a vendor's perspective of like, they didn't chase the dollar bill. And it's like, that is fundamentally different than what you're buying, right? Like, and he was straight up like, if that's not what you need, go buy a different tool. I'm not going to try to strap everything onto the top of this thing and weigh down my car because you have additional requirements that don't really make sense. And I think that is the type of communication we're talking about today. Hey, I want an IDS that can look at network traffic and also pull forensics logs. That's probably not something you're going to do, maybe with an EDR, but it's probably going to do both things poorly, right? Instead, get customized tools for the things you need is kind of the conversation, right? And we usually suck too with our acquisition cycles on the user side. We talk about requirements, and like 18 months later, we start testing tools. our capabilities or requirements have completely changed because the management may have changed, or we got a sweet Excel spreadsheet working already by then. And so we completely throw a new list of requirements at the vendor, and the vendor's like, what the hell? This is not what we talked about 18 months ago. And vendors can really suck, right? Seriously, are they ever even in the, sometimes you talk to them and they're like, what is your use case for this tool, right? Use IDS. Like, you don't know what an IDS does? You're selling me an IDS. You should know 90% of the use cases of what an IDS does, right? But vendors, they make most of the tools that we need. And so we need to be able to work with them to get the functionality that we need. And it shouldn't be a fight, right? We shouldn't be arguing with our vendors. Or what I commonly see is most companies, they buy a tool, they have like a weekly meeting or a monthly meeting with their vendor. People will complain for an entire month and they'll get on the call and just stare at each other. Hey, you got anything we can work on? James is like, I would really like work to do. Can I make it better? And I'm just like, I'm not talking to him. I'm not telling him what's wrong. Right. So ultimately it comes down to, how do we as an analyst get our words nicely over to James, right? So he can go fix our problems and go talk to the developer team or the architects or engineers or whatever it is. Any comments on the pain points, James?
There is a reality that vendors do need to understand that does lead to some of those awkward conversations. I've had them recently with a couple of customers where it's, you got to go deeper on their use cases and needs and do that assessment of, okay, you should be able to do that with our product, or like Andy said, you should not, this integration's missing. That reality of that, you as the users are living the day-to-day of it. We get to work with the product sometimes even less than our users because they might be in it for their full 8 hours a day or whatever their shift is. So making sure that I try to always come at that perspective, which does need that, what Andy's talking to. We have to be able to have this conversation on what's succeeding, like you got at earlier. We need to know what's working so that we can build on it, make it even faster or better. Quality and time matters a lot. And then also talk about what's blockers, and that's going to go into when we talk later about prioritization, to understand where, yes, okay, you can make a big list of what hurts and what's painful, but we got to put that in order to make sure that the highest value of improvement gets into your hands in a timely way, so that the overall performance of the job the tool's meant to do gets there fast.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's important too, right? A little admin note about our slides. We have a lot of bullets with stuff that we're not necessarily going to talk to. We're going to try to tell some stories throughout the talk. So slides may not align to what we're talking about per se, but these are the real key takeaways. But we do a little story time in a couple of sections. So if you see me jumping over a slide, feel free to make sure I'm not like in the middle of talking when you take a screenshot. But just so you know, like that, just want to put that admin note out. We have some good talking points in here that we may not actually talk about, right? So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the pre-procurement challenges, right? How do we identify actually what we need, what we don't need, assessing all of these flash images, right? You're walking around the conference and they're like scanning your badge and like, we could shoot down malware from 10,000 feet above the sky. And you're like, that's weird. That doesn't make sense. Or, you get the vendor pitch and they're screaming, we do it on the wire 15 times in a 10-minute demo. Wading through all that bullshit and trying to figure out, like, what do I actually need? Does this vendor do what it says it does, right? Mm-hmm. If their website says that they use a certain model, right? If they say, oh, we use Attack, cool, that was 2 years ago. Attack is still cool. They should still be using it, but it's probably not a sales pitch anymore. Everyone should be using Attack at this point, right? So going through, what do you mean by Attack? Oh, you just add it as a tag like everybody else does? Cool. Or can I actually see an attack graph, right? And actually understand what your requirements are. If I want to build a threat actor playbook, right, in a threat intelligence platform, can I say, show me this playbook and it show me all the attack techniques that were mapped to that reporting? Or do I just get a search a tag and see on that? Those are the same requirement. Two completely different views can come out of that requirement, right? And we're going to talk about post-procurement navigation, communicating our needs for future bugs, fixes, or new requirements, identifying any red lines, right? Fail fast. Don't get into a relationship that's going to last you 3 to 5 years in a tool that nobody uses. If it's a year after you sign paperwork and the tool is not installed and it's not your fault and it's the vendor's fault or it's your fault, you may not be ready for that tool as an environment, right? If it's 18 months after you purchased it and your users aren't using it daily, or monthly or whatever the intended schedule was, you may have a problem and you may need to be talking to your users, and you're probably pissing away money. I get to say that here, right? Yeah, pissing away money if your users aren't using it daily, right? You buy a fancy car and park it in your parking lot or park it in your car driveway. You don't take it out, other than COVID reasons. You know, you're kind of wasting money on a car, right? So don't spend a bunch of money every year on a product that your people refuse to use. Learn how to fail fast. Make sure your contracts are set up for annual reviews, or there's clear cut guidance in how you can get out of those contracts. Think smart and start getting your procurement cycle for the next tool before the other one breaks, right? So if you do throw a vendor off site because they don't meet your needs, don't go a year without another tool. That really sucks for your users too. So being a little bit better in your post-procurement cycles to figure out, when do I need to go buy something different, or have I outgrown this tool, even those kinds of things. And most importantly, let's talk about managing a relationship so that you can in the future be on a talk with a vendor and not talking crap with them. You can consider them your friend and go have 5 guys with them afterwards, right?
The attack example you use is a great one, because it's talking about that spectrum of concerns that when you go into those procurement conversations, like the travel and solutions architect is going to talk to, it's like, yeah, of course we hit this line item. You know, it's somewhere in the process we're going to talk through here. You've got to make sure that people have a chance to look at your people, have a chance to look at things and give an assessment where, yeah, this, I can use it, or I can't use it, or I can use it partially. And that's that managing relations post-acquisition that can help people move in so that you don't hit that many months later people aren't using it, and get that feedback to me and to all your vendors of, if it was like this, it would be more efficient or more useful. And then finding a way to see if there's some kind of partnership between yourself and the vendor to make it better for your users today while the product evaluates. Is that in our wheelhouse to do? Is that an integration to do? How do we solve the problem with that honest conversation?
Yeah, before I move on, full credit to Joe Slowick for this amazing meme. I spent like 2 hours the other day going through his Twitter page, just finding the perfect meme from him, because he's always putting out great InfoSec ones, but that's a great one. So pre-procurement requirements and conversations, right? So communicating the needs, right, from a user perspective. We need to identify what's broken. We need to identify what's a new capability. Oftentimes, depending on where you work, your management or your director team, or even if your managers and directors are squared away, but your acquisition team doesn't do the work, they may not understand the capability that you're asking for, right? And so you say, do you do MITRE ATT&CK? And they go out and they buy a tool that does MITRE ATT&CK, and you're like, that's completely the wrong tool, but we map to the requirement, right? So actually spending time like showing them how you do your job is really, really fruitful. Acquisition team, asking them if you can give them a demo of what you do before you have the tool is really, really important. If you're an acquisition person on here, congrats. I don't know how you ended up at a hacker conference, but really excited for you to be here. Go sit down with your analyst, right? If you're a manager or a director, go sit down with your analyst. When I was at US Cert in Kick at the time, pre-CISA days, Director Felker was the director of Kick. He came in and he did like his 90 of his teams and stuff. And then after that, he was like, I want to sit down and work with analysts and understand how they do their job. And so they came over and he's like, I don't need a briefing. I already know what your branch does. He's like, Andy, show me how to be an analyst here. And I opened up my email, showed him how I brought stuff in from a stakeholder submitting me threat intel. I remember 21 tabs on Firefox. And I said, now I'm going to bring these indicators through Firefox at all these tabs and do some open source enrichment. And he looked at me and he's like, I haven't gotten you a tool for that. And I'm like, well, you've been here for like 90 days. And he's like, no, that's a failure at my level. I need to get that fixed, right? And so he understood at his level, his decision-making and purchasing and stuff, and what that impact was at the analyst level, because he actually sat down and saw the work. It was the first time I've ever seen an executive do that. It's absolutely amazing. I've seen one other CISO in my career so far do that as well. If you're a manager or a director or an executive and you haven't seen how the sausage is made in your factory, I highly recommend you go spend some time, because within a year, he'd gone out in the funding. So I could stop opening 21 tabs. I could open one, go into a platform, and actually do this enrichment automatically. But that's what's important, right? Is understanding really what the work is and what those requirements are, and really being able to then categorize them as, this is a gap, this is a new capability. You may see a vendor demo and just be like, I never even thought we needed to do that, but we need to do that, right? So identifying if it's a new capability, an enhancement, right? Does it make your job faster? Does it enable you to integrate, getting a SOAR platform, being able to integrate your different tools, right? So if you can get an alert on a host, you can go look for network events too, that kind of thing. Most importantly, users, we have to get involved. We cannot ignore the acquisition invites, not show up to the table, and then get handed the tool and complain that the tool isn't what we wanted. If you're not joining the table and you're invited to the table, that's your fault for getting the wrong tool.
And something
James,
to add to
any
that.
advice for us?
Yeah, that time and people thing matters a lot. We've gone through a few evaluations as a vendor. We make an investment with really competent people, really competent analysts, and like 3 days, 5 days before the evaluation, they get pulled for some reason. It's they're contractors and they're at their hours, or there's a critical mission they need to engage with, and then like we got to scramble and teach new people about not just the product, but also the scope of the evaluation, what the rules of the evaluation are, what they're allowed to do. And it hit the people that get engaged in, like, in my opinion, the people getting engaged at kind of defining the need and shaping the need have to be allocated at an organizational level that time to stay invested in this decision all the way through the end and help do the evaluation. And the challenge that you face there is it can't be bonus time. It can't be like the above and beyond their average daily work. Finding the right people who can do that investment, do it efficiently, and help you make that organizational decision is worthwhile. Because Andy's story is dead on. You as an executive buyer, as a team leader, or as an end user, all have a different perspective of what's going on. And if the only way the user's perspective is rolled up through some document where everyone puts together their well-categorized needs, and it just rolls up to some eventual evaluation by people disconnected from what those words mean when it's authored, you're going to run a higher probability of making a decision to buy something that looks like it actually meets the end user's need, but doesn't actually, because they got disconnected from the workflow. And the last thing I'll say here on this slide is we've been engaged in conversations where people are frequently telling us like exactly how the product should work. It should work in this way or that way. And that's actually a harder conversation to have on most situations. What we need to understand is the pain that you're experiencing because the product does or doesn't do something. And we need to, or if it's hey, we want to go next level, here's something we want to do next. We need to understand the solution, the goal that would come into play. Like having a conversation with a customer this week on products they're producing on behalf of their organization outside of our tool to broader people, kind of crossing directorates. I had to take time, my team had to take time to understand the scope of that product before we could give them answers on how their intelligence product, before we could give them answers on how our vendor produced product could provide the data in an efficient way to go and get stuff done. That if they had just told us, like on a simple line item, we want data like this, I guarantee you the first couple iterations of us helping them take those steps forward would have been wrong. That investment in conversation with the end users makes the whole process of evaluation before acquisition and after acquisition infinitely more efficient and more accurate.
Absolutely. And as I said, we have a lot more material in here than we're probably actually going to talk through today. I plan on doing a write-up for my Medium blog, and I'll get James input on it as well. So anything we don't cover today, we will absolutely get you a plan. It will get planned in the next month or two to get a blog out and get more details on how we approach these things, because there are some actual real-world takeaway examples in here. But we find that teaching through stories and talking is a lot better than just going this and then do this and then do this. So I think we kind of covered this a little bit, but already, but justifying the time, blocking out the time. So I'll give you an example. It's important here. When I was at a previous organization, we went to buy a tool. That acquisition team did a great job. They did a down select. They picked 3 vendors to come in and actually pitch us. They pitched us for about 2 hours, 2-3 hours. And I say us, there was about 10 of us analysts from different teams in the room. There were some engineers that had to deploy the tool in the room, and we all got to see the pitch. We all got to talk to the vendors directly. And then they deployed the tool into our demo environment or into a training lab, and we got to play with each one of the tool for about a week each. Each tool got evaluated. We had spreadsheets. I'm going to show you a generic example. It's not from that thing, of how we evaluated every tool. And we went through our requirements and was like, can it upload a document? Like, yes, it can, right? That's a very binary question, but all of the tools should be able to do that. So we actually did a gradient, like, did it meet expectations? Did it exceed expectations? Did it do a really awesome job, kind of a thing? Let's get that company more points because they did something intuitively. And so our management carved out our time for us to be there basically for a month, going into this conference room and nerding out together and whiteboarding and talking about our problems with the tools. And we were able to get the tool that we needed. So time is very important. Outcomes, right? Can the tool meet this objective or not? Is it repeatable or does it suck? If you're constantly going back to the vendor or the vendor documents to ask how to do something, the tool's not intuitive enough. It should be replacing what you do already. One of the number one things that drives me crazy when I talk to analysts and they have a new tool in front of them, they're like, we need training on this tool. Vendors, if you constantly have to provide training for your tool sucks. Tools should be intuitive. You hand me a hammer, I know what to do with that. Open a can of beans, obviously. No, I know what to do with a hammer, right? If you hand me a platform and I'm constantly going, I need training on this for like the basic stuff, your tool sucks. It's not in. Go back through UI school, right? What is the old meme? User interface is like a joke. If it needs to be explained, it's a bad one. You shouldn't have to provide training every month to the users just to do basic stuff. If they want advanced training, that's cool. But if you're constantly providing training, got a helicopter going over, sorry. Your tool UI probably sucks, right? Quality, right? Does it make your job easier as your value integrate with what you want it, right? Splunk ES, all that good stuff. Or Elk or any of your other seams, not vendor specific. That was an inside joke. And then other, considerations, grouping these things, are these core requirements, or be cool, but they're not really required. Ultimately, hopefully, not just cost is justifying what you purchase, but the end user experience with the tool. I don't care if you save $500,000 on a tool. If your users don't use it, you didn't save $500,000. You're wasting whatever you're paying for it, right? So sometimes it's better to go in a little cost if your users are actually using it.
The key thing on this idea of prioritization and justifying the needs across how time gets saved, you get good outcomes, you get quality, thinking about it in that way helps then kind of create your list and helps encourage your users, where it's like, just ask them the questions. What do you need to save you time? What do you need for a better outcome? What do you need for a better quality? You're probably going to get a better list. And Andy's point about priority, where we're going now, and gradient, where it's not just a yes no answer, it's some kind of scaled score. You're going to get higher and higher likelihood of making a good selection in the pre-procurement phase, the more flexibility you have to let the evaluators really rank things and not just bear it down to yes no. If you keep things at just a yes no, do I meet the requirement, and the requirements are prioritized, you're going to get into the continued cycle of lowest price technically acceptable winning the day. And I think we all know how that goes sometimes.
I'm trying to read the questions too, and we're going to try to work the questions into the talk. It takes a lot, right, to get this stuff right. The question there's about, what about dealing with third-party risk, or, getting it through all these other teams? That's ultimately a management issue. If you don't know your own organization, right, go have a cup of coffee with those guys in a post-COVID world, or gals. Send them virtual coffee if you can, but get to know what the actual process is. I've seen it in bought a tool, right, and they're like, had their technical requirements list, like, minimum servers or blah, 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 went to deploy it, and then the IT ops team was like, we don't support that OS at all. And when we were delayed months for deploying it because they didn't even talk to the folks that had to deploy the damn tool. And so they had to go through a whole change control process to get a new OS introduced into our environment and stuff. That's all pre-procurement management stuff. And that's what your managers are doing. And I get it, you're managing analysts or engineers or whatever, but part of your job is called management, is to manage those relationships inside of your organization so that not just your user requirements, but the tools requirements can actually be deployed. I love you guys, but that is a management failure if you can't get a tool deployed after you purchased it. And that's a manager for the folks that were buying the tool. That's a manager for the IT ops team. Those folks need to be talking. And if they're not, I don't know what else to do for you, right? So here's a super generic. I threw this together. This was not the official one when I referenced doing this previously with a client. But this is kind of a gradient scale of how you can assess those things, right? Actually get a spreadsheet and list out all of your requirements, and not just like one word requirements, actually write some scenarios around them and then go through and rate these things in the tools. If you can get hands-on in the tools, rate those tools and actually go through it. Accounts or one license or whatever to be able to test things, like go out and do those things and actually spend the time as the user or the engineer, get the hands-on and actually rate each one of these things. Yeah, rating it for timeliness is really, really important. I know everybody wants to go to automation. I'm just going to jump right over that one. If you can automate, obviously that's why you're buying a tool, is to do things faster. Right? Is the human in the loop, human out of the loop, human is the loop, that kind of a thing. But really the timeliness of the things too. Is it making my life faster? Is it making the process I do faster? Or is it taking more time? It's not very intuitive. Going down on the quality side impacts time if it's not very intuitive, right? And I've used a platform where I had to do the same process twice into two different parts of the UI just to do the thing that I wanted it to do one time. I know I'm not explaining it very well, but I'm trying not to call out a vendor for their shitty upload process. But I had to go through one side, do a thing, go through another side, where the other vendor, I just did it as one seamless process and it was very intuitive, right? So those kind of things, give it a quality assessment. Can a hammer break out tile? Sure, but it sucks. Maybe if you did a vendor assessment, you would have gotten a jackhammer instead, right? Assess your tools. It's not just about a yes or no question. Give it these gradients at the end. You can rack and stack them, score them. And if you have more than one person scoring it, you should, at least like 3 or 4 people. You can run the averages, and now you can talk about, is the cost worth the highest score? Maybe we need to go with the second place score because it's going to save money, or we're actually going to get it deployed because IT Ops has the OS to support it. But at least now you've got more than just a yes or no. James, go ahead.
And then variety of users there on that averaging point matters a lot, because if you're and which depends on the tool, right? If you have a tool that does one thing for one niche user group, and you have a segmented budget and line item that's going to hit to make that user group better, you're really focused. But when you get a product that's going to span organizations, which fits with the kind of use case Andy's talking about and the evaluation he's speaking to, it's going to span teams, and you've got now like multiple people in play representing every kind of person in the long run that's going to be there, and giving them this kind of flexibility to score. It's going to then get you at that better solution that fits the better need of all the teams. And then, each team should be able to go in this and be able to help weight not just the outcome of the scores, but also the priority. Like to Andy's point, if budget is constrained or budget is significantly important in the grand scheme of user-facing functions, weighting those in the scoring process is actually going to help you come to that kind of hard decision at the end of, should we make the decision to allocate more funding for one solution, or are we going to be, lacking a better way to say it, good enough with another? The ideal solution is the ideal place is the best solution is also the lowest cost, but that's not always what you're going to find.
Yeah, is it Merlos? Maybe might butcher that name. Point two, right? I don't have here on. You should give the weight for the has to do, should have more weight, right? Those are your core requirements, should have more weight in your scoring system than the nice to haves, right? I would also like it to not just shoot down malware from the sky, but maybe malware in the ocean, right? Those are nice to have. Those should obviously be weighed differently. If you got, all 3s across the board for the nice to haves, but it doesn't do the core required functions, you probably shouldn't buy that tool either, right? Maybe though, you've identified a different set of requirements for a different tool. Talking from my own experience, again, not naming vendors, a lot of folks are going down the route of their threat intelligence platform also being their SOAR platform. Those are 2 completely different functions and capabilities. Again, that's like having a system that can do host analysis and network analysis. It's going to do both of them all right, but it's not going to be good at either of them. Probably not in 2021, maybe with some AI quantum physics in the future. But, right now, the reality is maybe I needed a SOAR platform more than I needed a threat intelligence platform. And using a lookup table in my SIEM was good enough for my tip for now. Or if tip, maybe I shouldn't break that core function by working too much on the SOAR capability, right? You got to consider those things. Those are related. Those are absolutely related, but they're not necessarily should be the same tool. My experience, I haven't seen any of them do both of them great. I see them both do it mediocre. Maybe mediocre is good enough. You're saving money. I don't know. But consider that. You may go through all these requirements and, man, these nice to haves, we're smoking it on this platform. I really, really want this, but we didn't meet any of our requirements. Okay, maybe you need to purchase 2 things and you got to go back to your board and go get more money. or you may make the decision to do a hard left and buy a different tool for different capability. But don't fool yourself into thinking that you're going to get, two things for one kind of a thing. Hopefully that makes sense. Here's a generic example for trying to replace Excel. Just kidding. Nobody would ever do that. It's the greatest tool ever made. But we wanted to be as vendor non-specific as possible and figured Microsoft could take the ding to their stock and nobody will notice after that SolarWinds incident, but whatever. So we figured we go after Excel here, right? How would you rate, a tool to replace Excel? Everyone's like, I don't know why you're using Microsoft products, man. The Google products are great. Like, no, they're not, right? My slides all looked a little weird converting from PowerPoint over to Google Slides, but whatever. But you can assess that, right? We're a small company. Should I be paying for Microsoft licenses or Google licenses for a corporation good enough, right? And start doing those evaluation. Those cost benefit savings are important, sure, but also usability, right? If I'm going to have some janky spreadsheet presented for my financials or my sales pitch as a vendor, and I go to a client and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm using like the free software that was installed on Linux. Let me just show you this Vim document that I wrote up this contract in. They're probably gonna be like, these guys aren't professional enough for us to, LibreOffice, man, I can't figure out how to use that still. I'm a bad hacker apparently. But if you go pitch, right, in something and the document looks like crap, maybe it wasn't worth saving the money. I don't know. But here, how to do the scores. You got the combined scores over here. I do have the criticalities, right? And so you can get into some Excel formulas and I'll write those into the blog, but you can do like a count if criticality is this, sum up the scores over here and combine scores. So you can see how it meets your must-haves, your should-haves, and like-to-haves, get separate scores in your total dashboard at the end. And you can say, this one has all of my musts or most of my musts, but a lot of shoulds, or I would like to have. So maybe it's worth reevaluating my requirements, right? Hopefully that makes sense. I'm not going to beat that up too much, but James, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so on screen, there's a word in chat called weight that would match with what Merlos put forward as criticality you see here, just for keeping things simple. And then there's like those gradient with variety of scores walking across the top, like Andy's talking to. A key thing for anybody working procurement or anybody setting this up, moving into that PM level, is in my opinion, you don't want to be in that place where just simply the highest score is guaranteed to be the right choice, because there might be other factors, or you might need to revisit scoring when you see things coming out, because maybe we really do need to reassess. Do we need to meet all the musts, or do we need to relook at things? And we put something in it must do these things. Does it actually need to? Like being able to make sure you have some flexibility when you get to that point post evaluation to make sure that you agree with the scoring is worthwhile, or doing scoring test runs. Like maybe do some scoring test runs on your current product before you, like if you're going to do it through a reevaluation, do some scores on current products to make sure your process works ahead of time, so that at the end, the ability to make a good decision is clearer.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I got to apologize to Excel with one of my world's famous tweets. I don't know actually who provided this, but if you follow me on Twitter, you've seen me publish this meme pretty much anytime anybody mentions Excel, because it literally is the best solution, or at least the second best solution to every problem. I went the wrong way. Nope, I'm just going to mess everything up today. Okay, there we go. So you've done your assessment. Now you do your fancy math and you select the right one with the highest score, right? Now, we already talked about that. It's not just the one with the highest score. Cost is involved. Can you deploy it is also involved, right? The big thing though is cost shouldn't just be the only factor. That's really what we want to drive home, is usability really should be a factor. Requirements met really should be a factor, right? I can save a lot of money by using Chinese product, but intellectual property theft is also expensive. So cost isn't the only factor. Sorry, China, I'm not kidding. Pre-procurement to-do list, right? Obviously, we talked about requirements. You should probably write those down, right? Make a list out all your needs and wants. Don't just think about the things that suck. Think about the things that you do really, really like in your tools. Absolutely write down the things that you like. That is the number one mistake I see users make. We forget to say the things that we need to have and that we love to have and we want to see stay there.
Which is why it's so important to define these things more by achieving a job function than it is about a line item, like you support this integration, or you support this feature, or you have this kind of graph or this kind of display, if you can write your requirements that will eventually be evaluated against the way people do work and the responsibilities they need to fill, speaking again to the needs and not like I want blue versus green level detail, you're going to get to an evaluation point to give people that flexibility to assess, can I do my job with this tool? Because in the end, we talk about tools, we talk about automation. I love where our product does automation. I love where it works with others that do automation. That's awesome. But in the end, it's people making decisions that define what those automations should be, or people making decisions in products to go and do things to scale out those decisions over time. So the closer you can get your requirements to representing that, evaluating against a person's job, the better write-up you're going to get from the vendors at the outset to prove that they do or don't meet that job need, and then the better evaluation when you get to that the testing the new solutions at the bottom you're going to be able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Free accounts, like I said earlier, a lot of companies or vendors will give you a free account if they have an online portal. Take advantage of those, right? If you're a manager and you're coordinating that user access, give your users some left or right limits. Sorry, it's a military range term. Tell your users what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do. Maybe in the free version, it's cloud and it's multi-tenant. Maybe don't upload personal or internal documents, but also give them expectations that you want them to spend an hour a day in the platform or give you feedback on the platform. I don't know how many times I've been given free accounts. They're like, hey, we gave you a free account. And then I just get it as an email. And I'll get it from the vendor, go over to the manager and go, hey, is this phishing? What is this? And they're like, oh yeah, we paid for those accounts, or we're getting free accounts, go test it. And they're like, well, what do you want me to test it for? Right? Give some expectations of what your users are doing. Have a conversation with them and then hold them accountable at the end of the week or end of a couple day trial period, whatever that is. Have a conversation about how the tool did, and consider your requirements list and maybe do your scoring there from the free version. Understanding the free version might be a little bit different in the capabilities and what you could do with the in-house version, because you can't put your intellectual property or your log data out into a cloud, multi-tenant cloud, right? That might be a little bit scary, depending on the type of platform. But set expectations for your users, clearly communicate what you want them to do and not want them to do in the free version, and have a post conversation about it too. I think we already kind of talked about this approach anyway with the, down select, play with the last three. Do not limit the vendor in your organization's connections. I absolutely know, you don't want them pitching to everybody. I get that. But one of the things I always see is there's always this bottleneck where they're like, if you have any questions for the vendor, you got to send them all to this one guy and this other team that nobody likes. Or just there's always that single point of failure, right? For vendor relationships, especially if you have contractors on site. You don't want the contractors talking directly to the vendors about your requirements because they don't represent your organization. Well, they're usually your users. So set up that time where your users don't care the color of their badge, have the opportunity to talk to the vendors and not just the salesperson. If you're talking to a vendor and they're only showing up with their salesperson, go talk to a different vendor. They should be bringing engineers, users, analysts, and people who know how to use the platform on the front end, right? And have that conversation. If ever a question, they're like, I got to take it back to my team, ask for a new rep, give them the second chance to send you a better rep. Otherwise, go to a new vendor. That's a very bad sign from my perspective as a user. Oh, people are just going to call me in the middle of this thing. Sorry. Probably about my car warranty or somebody suing me for all these bad things I'm saying about vendors. One of the two. Go ahead, James.
So from the vendor side, like that communication is helpful because it helps break down the barriers. Because if the only translation between what you need and what the vendor will do or be evaluated against is a document, the probability of mistranslation and misunderstanding is high. The other factors here is when your priorities are constantly in flux, the ability to do a healthy evaluation and a decision is hard. You should have the right where if they should be able to change, but there really needs to be some operational reason behind it that's causing that, not different people's or different opinions, or I hate to say it, just because you did a different manager who has a different set of opinions, that shouldn't necessarily change your organizational perspective on what's important or the weight, the criticality. And then regarding inefficiencies in the relationship and in the products themselves, like over communication is my advice. I had actually a conversation this week where I had a very adamant end user on how things today were creating a struggle for them, and it was hard to hear, just to admit it. But I now have more data that I can act on to give them a means to succeed today, and make sure that our dev team understands the actual impact to their daily operations, which makes the dev team come back and be like, oh, well, let's not do exactly what they say. Let's do this that's going to actually meet their need and make everything more efficient, because they're talking to me, which is where this customer, this user, is talking to me about their need. How is their job affected? You know, the worst case scenario for the vendor is what you got there at the bottom, is where the roadmap's always changing and we have no effective means of measure against it, pre or post procurement, or we'd never hear of the problem. You know, because if we don't know, we can't give advice or provide solution.
All credit to my buddy Chris Crawford. I hope you're dialing in, buddy. I call him the professor. That's not actually his handle, but I just made it up for him. He said this. I asked him to take a look at the slides and ask for feedback. And one of the things he said is, without requirements, is it the wrong tool or the right one? The world. So I was like, dude, I got to make a meme out of that. So all credit to Chris. That was a good one. He let us use it. But it truly is the problem, right? Like, requirements lists, if they exist at all, they're usually like a handful of bullets, and they usually suck. And that's how you end up with the wrong tool. There was a question earlier, like, what do you do when you get handed the wrong tool? That's where it's a conversation with your managers about failing fast, right? Getting training, maybe it is the right tool and you just don't have the right training. But getting that conversation with them as early as possible, so that at that 1 year renewal or 2 year renewal, that they're already pre-procurement cycle again and they're looking at another tool, and you're part of the conversation in the future. If it happens multiple times, just change organizations because your management sucks. No, I'm just kidding. That's true though.
And go work at FIA.
Yeah, thanks. Come work for FIA. Post-procurement management, right? So you selected a tool, you bought the right one, right? Analyst one. No, you bought the right tool, Excel, and you want to integrate it in your environment, and you're starting to get trained up on it. You're starting to find maybe problems with it, or it's not working the way you thought, or you had a good idea, Ferry. You're driving and stuck in traffic like I do, and you're like, oh, cool. You know what that thing should really do? It should use lasers to shoot down malware. How do we handle those post-procurement management, those relationships, right?
What color lasers? Green or blue?
Ooh.
Or red?
I mean, red would be evil, right? According to Star Wars. Obviously, blue, green, or orange, because those are the FIA colors.
This is where we start to get to Merlos's question earlier about what do you do if you were given a product? Well, internally, as a receiver, as a user of a product, the first step is understanding the people involved, both on your side, with you as a user. You got to log in and do a thing with the thing, and the people in your organization, and then working with potentially your managers or upper level decisions or acquisition to understand who is on the vendor side, which is where Andy's going to go now to kind of outline this. But this is where the first step is understanding people, the relationships, so you can start figuring out how to get help or make better decisions.
Yeah. Notice the key players is more than just the technical lead or the government lead or management lead or whoever it is, and the sales rep or customer success rep. There are a lot of key players involved in this conversation. If your organization is just with the vendor, right, whether it's a contractor issue, right, or they just don't like their users, they holier than thou type of managers, whatever. Those are going to lead to some serious communication problems. There should be more than one rep from both sides of the relationship involved. If you're constantly meeting with a customer success rep and they're never bringing engineers to the meeting or architects to the meeting, there may be a problem. If you're doing your training and it's the customer success rep doing the training and then he's the only person in the room, or he or she's the only person in the room, there may be a problem. Those may be some red flag signs, right, that you have a problem with your vendor or your own organization. Like I said, there should be multiple folks involved, and get them involved as early as possible. You have, pre-procurement or post-procurement, you bought the thing, but you haven't deployed it. You want to get your engineering team on the user end engaged with the vendor's engineering leads, right, or the installation team. They shouldn't be talking to a salesperson anymore. They should be talking to the person who can tell them what commands to run to get the damn thing installed, right? And hopefully you can make those connections. So you want engineers or developer types. If you have a SOAR team, get your SOAR lead and their super smart SOAR engineer involved early as possible, so you can get those integrations rolling. Integrations don't have to take a year after the tool's deployed to get them integrated, unless you're going for like IPS mode and start blocking stuff. Yeah, you may turn those on later and evaluate the tool a little bit more, but otherwise you should be able to start getting that thing rolling. Some red flags again. you start deploying this thing and it takes over a year to deploy it in your environment. That's either a problem with your architecture, or you got to fly around globally to install these things like sensors and certain physical aspects, or you have some political problems internally you got to figure out, and it's not the vendor's fault. The number one problem I've seen it so many times, where we put shit on the vendor that is never ever the vendor's fault. We don't communicate with them properly. We didn't give them their requirements properly. We've got the wrong POCs talking to them, or we don't, as users, touch it. And we're like, oh, it's a stupid tool, I'm not going to use it anyway. And we just put all this shame on the vendor, like, oh, it's their fault. They haven't done anything, and we've done nothing to build the relationship and put our right people at the table. Always do your best to put the right people at the table. If you're not the SME, but you're the one going to the meeting, make sure the SME is invited and have them sit at the table with you, right? Or at the outer conference room chairs, if you're like in DoD space, where they got all the generals at the table, but all the SMEs are out in the outer ring. Bring those people to the outer ring, right? Let them talk.
Absolutely. And we put users here
are key players.
Yeah, they get their own slide, because in the end, if the people using the product, aren't logging in and using it at the frequency like Andy referenced earlier, that's the core fundamental problem. They have to be involved with the opinions on, is it working today? What needs to change? Can we update the SOPs? Empowered to update the SOPs. One of the things we've actually seen operationally is users want to use it, but then the key players on the previous slide haven't done the due diligence to actually give them permission. They're like, hey, my job would be so much better over here, but the procedure that I'm contractually obligated to, or that I must follow, says I have to go do it in this way. So empowering them in all ways to press forward on your investment in tools is critical, so that their efficiency is there, and that their ability to use the thing you've invested in, to think positive, right? To not always be about the suck, be about the success. If you've bought a tool that works, those other people on the other slides that are internal to the customer are the ones that have to get all those barriers out of the way, so that users can use the thing that's been invested in.
Yeah, so like I mentioned some of the red flags already. Fail fast idea. Fail fast basically is you identify a problem, get it fixed or get it replaced. Like go get a new vendor rep, go get a new vendor completely. Think about what that life cycle means for you. If you've got to start procurement over again and it takes you 10 months, you probably want to start as early as possible. Do not go down with a sinking ship. You're wasting time and money for your organization. Like I said, I've made some of these references already. Tools and deployed in the first year. Users not adopting the tool. It's in prod for 90 days or plus 90 days, and users aren't really using it. They're still talking about it being in beta. Really, if we're buying solutions, users should automatically know how to put this into their SOPs, right? If I'm like, I really get tired of Notepad, I wish there was a way to sort this data, and you hand me Excel, I'm gonna be like, hell yeah, and 5 minutes later, I'm gonna be sorting data in Excel, right? Like caveman finding fire. If the tool's not giving you that aha moment, you may have the wrong tool. If your users don't want to use it because it's clunky or doesn't do what they thought it was going to do, you may have the wrong tool, and you got to learn to fail fast for that. If majority of your requirements aren't met, 12 to 18 months after deployment, that's very concerning. Pre-procurement, right? And it's not the vendor's fault necessarily. If they promise things, especially in writing, or if they promise things and then they didn't deliver it, yeah, that might be the vendor's fault. But it really could, take some ownership. You could have screwed up pre-procurement if you're not fully deployed, or mostly 90% fully deployed 12 to 18 months after you bought the damn thing. The other thing, if you're working with a vendor and more than 30% of your requirements are adding additional costs, or every time you talk to your vendor, they're like, oh yeah, we could do that for an upcharge, or we'll get you a quote on what that's going to cost. That's really, really scary. And the other thing I've seen too is vendors roll out, at their annual event, they roll out a whole new capability, and everyone's like, yes. And they're like, and if you upgrade now for $9.99, you get this capability. And they don't roll out that capability to their existing customers like they're a freaking cell phone company. Like, that's dirty business, in my opinion. A company should be adding enhancements throughout the product where they're creating a whole new capability, a new platform. Sure, maybe we should talk about, having a different product line. That would make sense. But if they're adding enhancements to the existing product line and they want to upcharge you to migrate to it, maybe you bought the wrong vendor in the first place. This is a true bullet at the bottom. If you or your children start using the name of a tool as a swear word. My daughter was like 18 months old, and I won't say the name of the tool, but it was built in-house at a client. And I would say it under my breath, like the F word, and she was like 18 months old walking around the house saying it like it was a bad word. That's a really bad sign that you got the wrong tool.
You got an interesting.
Any other red flags, James?
No, I think as the vendor here, I'm going to stay a little silent. I will on the slide. There was a question there in chat on, isn't that a selling module to roll out one thing and then add modules? It is, and I would contend that that's a way that many companies validly have a successful business model. The challenge, though, is when you talk about meeting requirements, this whole thing is about an evaluation. If you get to the point where after acquisition, you're like, hey, you said you meet these requirements and we bought you. How do we go about doing that? And the answer from the vendor is, oh yeah, you got to buy this other module. That's a red flag, because in my opinion, that cost should have been baked in to meet all the requirements in your acquisition decision. So that you would know all the modules or all the pieces if the company pieces things out. If the company doesn't piece things out and they sell one product that kind of does everything, and then the licensing is clearer, the probability of then having those awkward conversations down the line is lessened. And that's why I think Andy's putting that on. That's Andy. That's why I think you put that specific point about upsell as a red flag to you, is because from your view, you would have thought that cost and that module would have been there at the acquisition cycle. Otherwise, you wouldn't be told later on you need to buy more to do the job.
Yeah. So let's talk about managed relationship. We are going to start to run into the Q&A section here in a minute, but I think we've been addressing most of the questions. So if you have questions, start throwing them in the chat. We'll try to address them. If we don't address them here, I'll try to address them in the write-up that James and I are going to do on Medium later on. Killer Grizz, KLR, GRZ on Medium. Follow me on Twitter as well. I really do plan on addressing all the questions if we can't do it today. So, expectation settings related to vendors. I think, James, this is really your slide. It's a little bit of therapy for you, I think, at this point. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk as briefly as I can on this, which everybody who knows me knows it's not my strong suit. As a vendor, I'm going to know what my product can do, and I'm going to know what it should do in your environment, and I'm going to have strong opinions on how your people should use my product. But in the end, I'm not able to consult for you to identify your problems. I'm not able to get in there and define for you your own processes. I can tell you options on how to use the product well and how to not use the product well. And then you as a consumer, as a customer, have to make that choice. The deadline conversation, kind of that next one is, unless you're explicitly funding a vendor like a dev team, which is not a model our company follows, which is why it's important for me to point it out here. Unless you're paying them specifically to do things on a specific timeline, the ability to hold them to, I want features A, B, and C in a month or 3 months is going to be difficult. Having them respond to your priorities and maybe giving you a straight answer of your priority number 1 is priority X on our list, and we're going to keep it there until it gets fixed. And then you as a consumer can kind of see things roll out over time. And your things moving up to eventually get hit. Like that's a good relationship in my opinion. But that not all vendors are going to give you that option to give them cash to build the thing you want, and you may not want that option either. One of the things we've seen across the user base, and we've actually one of our most healthiest customers brought us in. It was hundreds of users, and they sat us down with their team leads and they said, "We don't trust our processes. Tell us how to use your product well to solve these problems." And we were able to show them how the product solved those problems. And they adjusted processes, SOPs, everything to empower their users to use the product the way it was designed to work. And in that workflow, we found limitations, et cetera, that we were able to work into our roadmap and make things better for them over time. And that was a much healthier conversation for us and them, because they were willing to admit that we have bought a product that meets our needs, but we might need to change the way we work. In Andy's example, he said he had 21 tabs open pre-acquisition and he has 1 tab open afterwards. You actually have to break people's habits to stop doing the things that they used to do if the product in play is going to make them better at doing their job. And so that's where understanding the design through documentation, through training events helps that transition period. And Andy makes a solid point earlier. A tool that's constantly needs training is not, that's a red flag or a negative. The other red flag I would put in that conversation is the inability to training, or unwillingness to have you, a vendor, do a 2-hour or a couple segment recorded sessions for you one time, because you hire new people. People come in. Sometimes someone has to start at ground zero. You have to be able to empower them from the beginning, and resources or training events are, in my opinion, the right way to do that. I'm certainly comfortable with, sure, we'll run a few sessions, you can record them and replay them as much as you want, as a solution to get people, get customers what they need to move forward.
Yeah. So, understanding the size of them, what kind of financing they have, are they venture capital back? They're probably just trying to make money. No, right. Understanding the type of business that they are, and how that impacts, your service and support contracts, how it impacts whether or not you're getting free training. How has the company grown, right? Were they just created, because some tech guy had a solution and, wanted to drive a Ferrari? Or was it a group of analysts who got tired of doing this thing manually over and over again? And so they created themselves a tool and they made it available as a solution, right, that you can purchase or get from open source. And the same problem with open source. If there's no vendor support, it's an open source tool, right? And there's only community support. There's a lot of costs involved in there. You might have gotten a free tool, but there's a lot of cost in figuring it out yourself and spending a lot of time on documentation online or Reddit or wherever the hell you can get information. So just because it's free doesn't make it free, right? So understanding how that works. I'm not going to beat this up too much. I think it speaks for itself. And we're running out of time. I'm pretty sure the live video will cut on your guys' end, and we may not know. So I apologize in advance if it does that. That's the platform's trick.
So this slide was put together to help things be efficient. This slide was put together that once you understand the nature of your vendor in play, you can understand how to use it to your benefit, which is like where Andy put this together. Like, how do I hack the vendors to get where you want to go? A privately held company is going to tend to be smaller than a venture-backed, Andy, venture-backed, not what you have on screen, company. It's going to make them a little more likelihood of being partners, getting strategic. You might be more likely to be like, yeah, you know what, we can put this thing on our roadmap. We can use you as a use case, or we can kind of do some collaboration here. But then, if you're going to have a large backed company, they in theory should have more resources to handle things or be potentially a more mature solution at the outset. That's privately held and larger. I kind of blended the small versus large. Small has some risks to be kind of they get stuck or efficient. Large could be successful, or maybe they're inefficient, a little bloated. You've got to make that assessment with how you see your vendor interact. If you have a large vendor that's taking months to get to basic requests or solutions or just improve documentation, versus a small vendor who's like, I get email comms pretty quickly from them and they get updates to their guides or workarounds to me. In addition to, I see the product change 6 months down the line.
And we lost video. That was the end of it.
Awesome.
I know they
do we keep going for people in the room, or are they just off?
They can't hear us or see us anymore.
We almost got through it. I think we got through the important stuff.
I was freaking out and talking really fast the first 20 minutes because I thought we were a 30-minute slot, not an hour. Yeah. I was like, shit, we got way too much material. And then while you were talking, one of the times I handed it to you, I checked changed tabs, and I was like, oh, it's a 60-minute talk.
Yep. I think with getting to there, and then the things we're missing at the end is know yourself, wrong vendor, and then the time to hack your vendors. That getting the slides out there and doing the follow-up post, I think is going to be the right way to follow up with the crew. I think we got through the important stuff, and people I think we answered all the questions as we went, either in chat or oh, Dave says we're still broadcasting.
Dave, you still hear us?
Oh, well, we still have like 30 attendees in room, Andy. Maybe we should finish this out.
Wait. Why did it drop for some people? I'm very confused.
I am not the vendor of this platform, so I don't know. But
all right. Sorry, guys. So it looks like it dropped for some people. So yeah, we have more stuff. We'll cover it here, and for those that dropped, we'll share it out later. Yeah, so know yourself. Right, what type of risk are you willing to accept? Leveraging the adaptability to change operations, right, to suit the product, right? I'm talking about addressing our SOPs, being flexible,
Yeah.
not being stuck in the mud. Go ahead, James. You can cover some more of this stuff.
So understanding yourself is important. So I've gone through a big career change. The majority of my career was spent at a very large government integrator contracting firm. I then switched to come over and join the co-founders as first employee here, and switching to a small, privately held vendor company. Personally, I love the change. I love the company. I love the product that we're doing, obviously, because I'm doing it, right? But that gave me this perspective on this gamut. The small company, I can talk to everybody, and we're pretty risk accepting in terms of like going after big things, but not like in some areas, and in other areas, like on the way we manage our growth potential, we're intelligent to stay stable. Working at the big entity prior, like the ability to get things to move was very difficult. They were very risk averse, and there was a lot of kind of structures in there. So I had to learn how to use that structure to my benefit, to kind of communicate and get buy-in from more seniors to be like, oh, this is a important thing to go forward. The event that Andy talked about with Felker at US CERT is a great example of an intelligent leader understanding top to bottom what's going on and then making strategic decisions. If you're in that very structured organization, you've got to find a way in that organization to use your seniors as a user to understand your problem and become your direct seniors to be your advocate up the chain to understand the problem, communicate in their language. Like if you go back to the earlier slides and you say to a senior, in my current way of doing, I spend 40 hours a week doing A. With this product, it would take me 5. And then I spend 35 hours doing this other thing you want to do. That catches people's attention, and it's going to have your needs be justified and argued on your benefit. Yeah. Versus on the other side, like if you're a very adaptable, flat, low hierarchy organization, the ability to move and pivot and make good decisions quick is going to come into play. But the challenge there I would advise is you as a user, have some diligence on your decisions. I've given bad recommendations before, and I was very grateful to work with people that told me, no, let's look into this a little more, and it stopped me. I was much younger at the time, without the beard or the gray, so I'll chalk that up to youth. But that diligence to prevent just jumping at the latest thing is going to save you a lot of time and energy on vendor selection, and in general, like even going into that process change stuff we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. I talk about example, large versus small. I remember a couple of years ago, we were going through a procurement life cycle, and this small company no one had ever heard of came to pitch us one day. And they were talking, and they're like, oh yeah, and for the folks that saw the demo a couple of weeks ago, we didn't have this capability, but you mentioned it, so we got it rolled out. Let us know if this is how you wanted to see it. And they started to continue the demo, and I remember, I think it was me or one of the other guys, like, wait, when did you do that demo with them? And they're like, oh, like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And in this small company, right, they were young and agile. They rolled out a new capability to the platform for a requirement for a customer they hadn't even had a contract with yet. And that really impressed us as a team. Like, we've had so many vendors like, oh yeah, it's on our roadmap. And here was a company who was very agile, able to respond and give us an absolute requirement. I mean, it was a showstopper not to have it for us deployed in their platform before we'd even considered purchasing it. So there is that perk, right? But to James' experience, right, smaller company may not have the depth in their bench to go do bigger, crazier projects too. So there is some perks of using a larger vendor who's got a deeper team. There's just pros and cons you got to consider. So,
and this goes into, if you listen to Andy's language, he used the term showstopper, which aligns to what we talked about at weighting and criticality as a must. Being in that situation ourselves, when we heard of a customer we really want, be like, we can't move forward with you for A, B, C, and D. We've had some evaluations come at us and be like, listen, we really love everything you do, but this one thing that you don't do is why we can't proceed. It's sad and it's rough. The first situation was one where we were told explicitly up front and early and given a window to come back and kind of show them we're going to adapt and be good to you. And that was very positive because that customer ended up acquiring us. The other was they went through the eval, and in their down select process, they just kind of made that call of you're not checking the box for this one thing. Which goes back to that waiting, right? We hit everything else in the conversation with them. We hit all their other musts, and we did it better than their other things. But this one must was honestly, we don't do it, and we can, but we need to have some understanding on if you're going to proceed with us, if we do. And that lack of flexibility to give we want to go with you, but we need this by this date, we probably would have proceeded with that and committed to it as a good relationship. So having that flexibility with your vendors when you get to that scoring and eval, so that you can tell them flat out, we can't proceed forward with you without these things, empowers them to be adaptable or not. And if they're not, that's an easy decision. You hit that big red no button.
Yeah, so some of the red flags, you got the wrong vendor. We kind of talked about, they're rolling out new capabilities every year for an upcharge. They come out with a big open keynote speech, and they're like, we built this thing 3,000, and like, but I have the 2,000. They're like, it's going to cost you the upgrade, right? And they keep doing that, year after year. That might be a red flag. Maybe that's just their sales model, and that's cool. But think about whether or not you're still getting the support. If they've got the time to build a whole new platform every year, or a whole new capability every year, and they're not rolling out to their existing customers, they're probably not building on the requirements you're giving them year after year. So consider that, right? Every conversation adds to additional cost. Or if you ask about something and they're like, oh, there's a workaround, that's fine, right? David mentioned here in the chat about having good success with working with overcome some showstoppers. That's cool for like one or two things, but if everything you do, and especially what you consider like a simple task or a basic function of the platform, and they're like, oh yeah, this is how you would work around that. If they keep using that language, that's a red flag. You got the wrong vendor, right? It should, again, a UI like a joke shouldn't have to be explained.
I'll give a story.
Use cases. This is my number one complaint about vendors. You come in to do a demo and you ask me what my use cases are before you showed me your platform. If you don't know what a SOC does or a threat intelligence team does and you're pitching, get the hell out of the office. Like, you don't deserve to be here. You built a tool to solve my problems as a SOC analyst or a threat analyst. Show me your pitch first, leave some time at the end for specific use cases, and say, is there any use case we didn't cover? Because if you don't know what a SOC does or a CTI team does, you probably didn't build a solution to solve my problem in the first place, and you shouldn't be at the table. That's a really big red flag, and I want to shoot a flare at you for that one. But James, go ahead.
Yeah, the workaround things that, my opinion, are healthy are things where, like, oh, hey, the platform as a threat intel platform, it's all about data, right? So I'm going to speak to that in our use cases. The customers talk to us like, hey, your platform has all the data inside of it, but I kind of need it in this format, in this way, because I have these mandatory requirements that I haven't been able to change the SOPs yet. It's like, okay, let's give you the means to get the data out. That's not necessarily a built-in feature, but let's give you the means to get the data out in the format you need to answer your question. A key use case has happened where one of our customers has very strong relationships with a wide variety of international partners, and they bring that knowledge they get from them in to make good and intelligent sharing security decisions, doing what a tip should do. But then they've actually migrated all their previous methods of reporting to leveraging data outputs we've helped them use. So they're using the platform day to day to do their job. It's been adopted and used well. But then it's like every year they have this one-time activity. It's like, hey, we got to go do that report thing again. It's like, okay, yeah, here's the thing that meets your specific need and handles your specific requirement. And it's so niche and unique that software development in the product probably would take more time and energy on everyone's side, and the probability of missing their need is higher versus let's just be your partner in the relationship with like the vendor rep on screen to get you what you need in a timely fashion and make sure it's durable, because they've now done it for a few years in a row successfully. And this goes back to the MITRE ATT&CK thing. Originally there was other data points they cared about, and because they figured out, oh wait, we have attack here as well. You do. It's like, okay, we're actually going to expand our product, what they're producing outside a platform for reporting and benefits, and they're able to do better assessments of the relationships they have. So that's the kind of workarounds I see as helpful. Long run, just to own it, our goal is that those workarounds are always in some capacity temporary, except when they're really in that niche use case, because things should move into be product features eventually. Workarounds should be temporary, and then they should roll into a product solution down the line. The risk, the red flag is when vendors can't make you succeed today, or can't give you an idea of their understanding about how important they get how important something is in that post-acquisition reality to then get you where you need to be to succeed.
Yeah, and I would say the biggest red flag I will say is not on the slide. If you got the wrong vendor or the wrong solution, is if it's not a solution. If it didn't solve any of your problems, or if it added more problems than it solved, it is not a solution. Furthermore, I just want to use furthermore. Time to hack your vendors, right? Develop a plan to assess and manage your requirements. We talked about putting your spreadsheet together, right? Put out your requirements, actually put some narrative around the requirements. Need to be able to upload. Well, I need to upload, right? Need to be able to upload an auto types of indicators. For my case, I'm a threat intel guy, or whatever your data points are. Need it to be actually usable and not just a blob of text, right? Is it searchable? Actually writing out those things, right? And ultimately testing them, getting engaged, multiple teams, right? If you're buying a threat intelligence platform and only the CTI team's at the table and the SOC's not there, or incident response isn't there, or the risk team isn't there, you've got problems. It's CTI team, right? Probably buying the tip, and their requirements should be most of the musts, but those other teams have some requirements too, and they should be at the table. One team or one or two people at the table, you are doing acquisition wrong. And most importantly, if you're buying a tool purely from a demo, vendor-led demo, and you didn't get hands-on and your people didn't get hands-on, you're doing procurement wrong completely. Don't buy a car without I always buy cars without test driving. Don't buy a tool without test driving, I'll tell you that much. And communicate with your vendors. They're ultimately not evil. You know, if you're not in the government space, they can actually buy you lunch, so at least you get a free lunch out of the conversation. You know, they've got some of the softest swag shirts and polos in the world, more than just the shitty little pens you get at the conferences. But no, talk to them. They are people. They want their solution to work, right? You know, we had it earlier. James said, like, the biggest thing in the world, biggest problem in the world is if they're not being talked to, or, you know, they're creating more problems. One, have coffee, have an honest conversation. I will tell you this: if you are a vendor and you want to know if your tool sucks, give me a free account. I've done this for every one of the major threat intelligence platform vendors in the market. I've had free accounts with them for years. Before, I've given their salespeople and their engineers feedback. I've done it over dinner. I've done it over email. I'm willing to do that with pretty much anything that's kind of in my space. If it's not in my space, that would just be unfair for me to give you that kind of feedback. But I'm going to give you honest and feedback that you're probably not going to get from most customers, because they don't want to violate whatever rules or things. I'm totally cool with it. Don't get your feelings hurt. Make your tool better. In a year or two from now, if I don't see some of those things addressed, I'm going to start losing respect for you. 5 years from now, and I've known some of these companies for 5 years, and they haven't rolled out any of the things that I told them that they suck, I no longer recommend those companies when people ask me for a solution, because they haven't done anything. Not to say that my opinion is the most important, but I give you unfiltered advice, right? When Analyst One reached out to me a couple of months ago and said, "Hey, we're getting ready to do a new UI. You want to take a demo?" And I was like, "If you broke my tool, I'm going to kick your ass," right? Like, that's the kind of thing you're going to get from me. And I'm more than I love working with vendors, because it makes me smarter and I understand how tools work better. But I know that those are going out to the community and people are buying those things and deploying those things. And I want, you know, my bank to be more secure. So if I can tell a vendor to do something better, and that makes my bank more secure, or my electric grid more secure, or my supermarket more secure, that's a good thing for all of us, right? And so give that feedback to vendors.
Yep. Yeah, we are humans, to emphasize that again. We are not Cylons, if you know the reference. And the thing on that communication is crucial, because you're going to experience in communicating with your vendor, like Andy's saying, that the communication happens early, happens often, overshare. And then if there's not honesty in return, if there's not able to give feedback, and if there's not change, then that's starting to realize some of those flags that Andy said, not me. And priority. The only time communication goes wrong is when you aren't able to keep yourself as an organization prioritized to the vendor, which does mean, as a customer, you've got to sometimes put one user group needs above another. If you as a customer have a small team you're buying for, the ability to keep things easy and deconflict is going to be less. But in some of our customers, they with hundreds of users and dozens of teams, the ability that it's not on me to tell you what's most important. I will prioritize what we will do internally to our dev team. I will invest our time according to what you say is most important. But if in the end you tell me that this team's needs are most important, but a year from now it was team B's teams that actually are affecting the acquisition or the re-up decision, that's going to put us all in a negative place. Because what if we had teams B's needs higher in the list? What if we had their feedback higher in the list? What if we had shown them the workarounds or the training beforehand? Then we would be in a different spot. The more important needs would be met, and you wouldn't have this conflict between team A loves us and team B hates us. You would have the more important team moving forward, and then we'd be on to team A's needs. That priority and deconflicting it is big. And sometimes, with the advent of new data standards, not that I'm naming names right now, but you probably know what I'm referring to in the threat intel space, that's pushing down a lot of user-facing needs because the community is evolving. We have to adjust to get the data standards done because, and afterwards we'll get back to the specific feedback requests. And that's an honest conversation we will have with you so that you know where we're going and why, and where your needs are in that list.
So ultimately, I think we answered a lot of questions on the road as we were going. Otherwise, people lost, they're not hearing us anymore. Ultimately, I want to thank James and his team for being an awesome vendor to me over the years, but also being here to do this talk. Hopefully, your tools after this will suck less. Your procurement process will suck less. Hopefully, this talk didn't suck itself. So thank you guys for attending. Go watch other talks. You're going to be late now. I feel bad for going over, but at least there's not speakers waiting on this room, so I feel a little less bad. But hope you guys enjoy the rest of B-Sides. These slides will come out. I'll probably just put them out on LinkedIn SlideShare soon, and then we'll actually get a write-up supporting that in the next couple of weeks if my life can slow down a little bit. Thanks, James. Thanks, everybody else.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, all.